Hello, everyone. My name is Allie Libb, and I would like to welcome you to today's ReadyTalk webinar, the first in our Future of Work series titled Office Design and Infrastructure Evolution in the Digital Age. ReadyTalk is pleased to bring you this six-part webinar series, which is designed to provide you with an inside look at the state of today's business environment and how key components are adapting to technology. Experts in office design, IT infrastructure, workplace process, and training will share their expertise and experience to provide you with key takeaways from each session. So before we get started today, I'd just like to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. We'll be recording this webinar, and a copy of today's presentation will be emailed to you post-event. Also, if you have questions during today's session, please feel free to submit them using the chat feature that's located at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to contribute to the social conversation surrounding today's webinar, please use the hashtag FOWWS. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. I'm pleased to welcome Tracy Weimer, Vice President of Workplace Strategy at Knoll. Tracy leads investigative workplace research focused on product applications. His research focuses on the study of the workplace, understanding trends in the emerging workforce, and the ability to translate those needs into specific applications. He emphasizes understanding customers' workplace goals and meeting them through tangible products, services, and information. He is also a member of the Knoll product development team. Tracy joined Knoll in 2002, and prior to that, he managed the Bay Area office of Space, a workplace strategy-based interior architecture firm, and spent 13 years at Bundy & White, a firm he co-founded. He also served as the Director of Industrial Design at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. Tracy was a competitive sailor racing classic wooden boats in San Francisco Bay. He's a former professional chef and most actively the father of 11-year-old twins. He also lives in San Francisco. So with that, Tracy, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Allie, thank you so much. Thanks for the setup, and thank you for joining us today. One of the things we're going to touch on are a variety of elements that are, as the slide said, shaping the modern workplace. As we look at it, and we spend a lot of time investigating what aspects of either technology or sociology or architecture are impacting the modern workplace today. And a few key things have really sprung up. First and foremost, the pace and the nature of work is really changing, and it's really escalating. Number one, the pace is escalating. And the nature of work is shifting a great deal. It's shifting a bit away from, if you will, the lone wolf coming up with the next great idea to more of a group effort of people collectively coming up with great ideas. And we're seeing some demonstrative changes in the workforce itself. Just the social demographics that are evolving. And we're going to touch on some data points that we captured from a study we did specifically outside North America, because we really think these data sets are harbingers of things to come to the North America workplace and workforce. And the workplace itself is evolving. And I think that's one of the key takeaways, is that it's not so much a revolution that's going on, but it's a bit of an evolution. Because I almost hate to say, but I'm going to maybe spoil some people's expectations in the fact that our findings and our perspective on this is that there really is no one office of the future. I know that's a phrase that gets bantered about a lot, but the reality is the key component, the key aspect of office design today is really the notion of change. And how can we be best prepared for change? One of the studies we've done actually looked at why organizations undergo change. And we found that they really fell into two categories. That there's the tactical reasons. Some of it evolves around supporting the work that's going on, maximizing some space that the organization may currently have. Most of the people we speak to aren't really looking to increase costs. They're just trying to control some costs. Fortunately, sustainability has been kind of baked into the process today. So that's kind of a great goal that most clients are sharing. And one that is really rising is the higher importance placed on not only ergonomics, but health and safety, and how that translates into wellness and well-being, which we'll talk about later. On the strategic side, there's this whole notion of how do the employees really understand their values? Can that be communicated through the design of your facility? Also, that commitment, do the employees feel that there's some type of contract between the employer and the employee that they feel they have a path to a new future there? The notion of innovation, is your environment supporting that? And in this current battle of talent, how is your workplace really positioned to be part of the equation that not only keeps the talent you have, but attracts a new generation of talent to your enterprise as well? One of the other reasons for change is this notion of brand. I think some of the things we've worked with companies on, it's very interesting. Well, they'll spend all this time and effort in really branding maybe the lobby of a building or the entrance of a building or even the exterior of a building. But by the time the employee gets to their desk, they're losing sense of who they work for. They're losing sense of that brand. So that notion of communicating that brand throughout the environment, throughout the space, so that the employee, once they sit at their desk, has a very clear understanding of who or what they're working for, really is becoming a key strategic goal for many companies today. And then the notion of collaboration and how in our world we've seen collaboration directly linked to the innovation that the companies are really trying to realize. So all of these changes kind of occur in the context of a building envelope. And we look at how they also get channeled into different elements of change that impact this very static envelope of the building. You can say like a building, on the low end is going to be around for 40 plus years. So what are the factors of change that impact that building envelope? Well, first and foremost, I think the thing that is pretty startling is most opportunities for specific workspace change only occur once every about 10 years. And a lot of that is linked to lease terms. Obviously, it's a very comfortable lease term for many organizations. They get engaged in a 10-year lease. And in the interim, within that 10-year span, of course, there may be simple moves, adds, and changes. There could be some paint and carpet cleanup, those types of things. But that wholesale demonstrative change typically only occurs at that moment when that lease is either being reconsidered or a change in lease occurs. I think one of the interesting things we're in the midst of right at the moment is a significant workforce change. And we're in that cycle at the moment where we're seeing some generational changes that typically only occur about every 8 years. And we're going to talk about how those shifts have occurred in just a bit. And I think one of the key things, talking about the nature of the pace of business today, is the fact that organizational changes now are occurring on, quite frankly, more of a 3-year cycle. We've actually talked to CEOs that have said, if I can get my hands around the next 6 months, I'm feeling golden. So there's a lot of volatility when it comes to the organizational aspect of business, and how do you factor that change element into how the building envelope supports it. And of course, probably one of the most rapid rates of change is centered around technology. And this is actually the 18-month cycle. Goes back to Moore's Law, Gordon Moore being one of the founders of Intel. He basically stated the speed and capacity of a chip will double every 18 months. And it has held true since he came up with this back in the early 60s. And it's projected to hold true well into the future. So as we look at these elements, as we look at technology, the organizational changes that are going on, the opportunity for the demographics shifting, and what you can physically do in the workspace, they may not all be in sync. So they may be occurring in different cycles, if you will, but they all need to be contained with that envelope of the building. We are also in kind of a current state of, if you will, media attention on the workplace. There's always just, a little pun in the header there. These are really not ordinary times in the fact that they're looking at how companies can save money. The notion of talent and skills and how to link the needs of an organization to the skill sets that are out there. Where do people need to go to find the jobs that are out there. And the notion of how do you survive when the economy gets a little pinched, all of this is kind of in the media at the moment. And so the workplace itself is being in the media as well. And I think it's really impacting the people that sit at the desk of organizations, because one of the studies we conducted, which really looked at, what is the temperature, what's the pulse of the employees? Some of this was done by Nielsen, some of it was done by Glassdoor, but the concern from a CEO standpoint is the availability of skills, finding the right person with the right skills to meet the position they may have available. And a study from LinkedIn sat there and said, 85% of the global workforce is either actively or passively looking for a new employer. Now, granted, this may be a little bit self-serving because LinkedIn's about connecting people in the workplace, but the reality is that there's either a passive, at least let's look at what new job offers may be posted on your social media site, or there's an active role of people considering what is next. And one of the key deciding factors in this is where your friends may go. If you make friends at work or you go to a workplace with a friend or a colleague and they jump ship, you have a higher tendency to jump ship with them. And the one from Glassdoor was talking about engagement. And this was talking about people that are really actively engaged, like when they're at work, they're really on. And Glassdoor reports that 87% of the global workforce is not engaged or is actively disengaged, which is even more troubling. So as we look at all these facts and these findings from key research centers, we look at this notion of skill and the people that really have the skills that need to come to the organizations to help them foster and drive innovation. There's a freedom today. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of metaphors that look at today's workplace and workforce as more like a movie production site or a set, meaning disparate talent comes together for a feature film. They work really intensely together, but at the end of that, they disband and they go off to other occupations or other gigs, if you will. So it's how do you really keep and attract those key skills that are in short supply and try to hold on to them. So, you really have to engage across all generations. And, of course, importantly, the millennials are shaping some of the workplace today. And as we look at the workplace, by 2020, or the workforce today, by 2020, 50% of the workforce will be coming from Gen Y. And Gen Y is this generation that really has incredible capacity. It's bringing up kind of the capacity gap that Gen X created. And this is just sheer numbers. There were just fewer Gen Xers born than Gen Ys. So the Gen Y's numbers are really coming in strong, and they're going to really help shape the workforce by 2020. So there's a certain degree of understanding that generation that needs to be brought to bear in the workplace today. And the flip side of this, baby boomers by that same period of time is going to drop to 23%. But it's an interesting notion in the fact that with the baby boomers, many of them aren't really just leaving the workforce completely. They're maybe going out of their corporate gigs and going into something that is referred to from the baby boomer standpoint as their encore job. So they may have a career in a core industry, and once they retire from that core industry, they become a consultant for that core industry. So they're keeping active in the workplace, if you will, but doing so in just smaller numbers. And also, the generations have a different view on the office. The baby boomers really listed, what was the most and least important aspects of office design. The most important was acoustic privacy. But they were kind of born and reared through what they know, which was the age of cubicles or private offices, and that acoustic privacy is something they've become accustomed to. The least important was this notion of being engaged in the workplace, because this was a generation that basically they went to their jobs, they went back to their home. And that kind of mashup between your work and life wasn't really occurring when they began in the workplace. Gen Xers, the most important aspect is almost reversed. It's that engaging workplace. They want to come in, they want to be active. And with the Gen Xers, they're the ones that started doing exactly what I just mentioned, mashing that work-life component into a kind of a holistic feeling about the workplace. The least important for them was the acoustic privacy. They felt that the buzz of the workplace was an important thing to participate in. And then Gen Y, engaging workplace is still up there as the most important, but the least important for them was meeting spaces. And I think a lot of this response was, it was a reaction to almost the way the question was posed. You look at meeting spaces versus activity spaces, or spaces that people can go to really engage. Meeting spaces don't sound that kind of attractive. So if you look at the generational distinction, they have a different view on the office. And there's one coming after them, which is Gen Z, which is entering the workforce around 2020. So these are folks that were born, right around the turn of the century, if you will. So all of this change is coming from a generational perspective. But I want to caution you, while there are significant, if you will, distinctions, we can't design a workplace just geared towards one generation. Even with the workforce today, which still represents three major generations, the baby boomers, Gen Y, Gen Z, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, there are still, across the generations, there are benefits to a better workplace that everyone appreciates. As the workplace becomes more humane, more holistic, it becomes a better place to be. Everybody is benefiting from that. Now, when we get to the youngest generations coming into the workplace, the Gen Y and Gen Z, Gen Y has really been this notion of this. They're comfortable with the ambiguity of just really a kind of unstructured workspace. And they really appreciate that high degree of choice. While on the flip side, Gen Z that's going to be entering the workplace, there's a notion of order, structure, predictability that comes into play. The notion of a place to find refuge for some degree of privacy. And this is truly a generation that's been connected not only through technology, but video technology since their early days. So this notion of enclave spaces that come into play as well, for in-person and online collaboration. So online collaboration for many of the members of this generation is a comfortable collaboration for them. And then as we look at the workplace more as a business tool, some of the things that come out that are pretty telling is the notion, and this was from Glassdoor as well, the notion that the role the office plays as far as really thinking about the office as expressing the company culture. Well, 8 out of 10 from the Glassdoor study really considered the physical office environment an important part of the company culture. However, in that same study, 7 out of 10 were dissatisfied with the expression of their company's culture. And a culture, starts becoming about this manifestations of the collective behavior of your employees. And how do you really foster that in a physical environment? It becomes a real challenge for a lot of organizations today. Also, as we look at the ability of the workplace to impact to competition, if you look at the workplace, only 24% of folks cited look at the workplace as really impacting job satisfaction, while 5% felt the workplace had an impact on their individual performance, and 11% felt that the workplace itself had an impact on team performance. Now, granted, so there's other things that come into play as far as individuals' perception of their performance within their workplace and within their jobs and their careers, but we can't diminish the importance of the physical environment as a component as they go into market for these. And it also affects the ability to compete for talent. Obviously, if you have a poor workplace and it doesn't really support well or show well in that workplace equation of attracting top talent, then you're kind of at a disadvantage. So some of the top job likes that were cited: great coworkers, number one, which is always about the community, or by working with great people. And right behind it was the work environment. And third on that list was the benefit package. So it's interesting that the work environment is actually trending higher than benefits as far as what people consider as they're looking for the next job. And then the top job gripes, well, as much as your community and your great coworkers, the good ones you really like, but the annoying ones you really don't like. So the annoying coworkers were at the top of that list as well. The poor work-life balance, if it becomes too dominant and there's not a degree of flexibility for you to experience your life, that it's only about the work, that's not a good thing as well. But poor work environment itself was cited as the number 3 top job gripe in this survey. So the notion of workplace change encompasses a great deal more than simply the physical environment. Yes, the physical environment, the real estate, the building you choose, the facility, the way it's fit out, obviously from our perspective, the furniture you select, does have an impact, but it has to be balanced with really how you feel and engage your workforce. Because as we look at it, the people really do have a choice, but it's also the people that bring all of this to bear for the companies that we work with. They look at the ability, the innovation, the skills, the drive, the knowledge, the understanding. This becomes the collective culture of your organization that gets manifested through your people. So what's interesting is as we look at the workplace costs, the chart on the left has really looked at specific a 25-year cost of developing, owning, and operating an office building. And about half those costs are directly tied just to they're building related. And then roughly a third are mechanical and electrical services. And there's a certain percentage to furnishings and furniture, and of course cleaning, security, and maintenance. But of those building costs, once you factor in the salaries of the occupants, all of a sudden those costs of maintaining that building are dwarfed by the investments that companies have to make in their people. So it becomes really paramount that investment in people and talent, attracting the right talent, fostering that right talent, and nourishing that talent, once it's in-house, becomes really critical to the success of an organization. And to put it in dollar terms, if building construction would cost you a single dollar, building operation costs you about $1.50, and people and processes in supporting these cost you about $15. So it's really, from a sense of scale, the importance of people really takes the cake in this one. And the people do have a choice. In fact, organizations have a choice. They have a choice of what building they select, how they fit out that building. They have a choice of the technology platforms that they make their investments in. They have a choice of the various pieces of equipment that they come into play. But the people themselves have a choice. We're talking about this very nimble workforce today, and almost that production set workforce today, that they can make a choice to go to another employer if any of these elements really aren't kind of hitting or not hitting the mark for them as far as the workplace expectation. Because it becomes down to being more than just about real estate. It's that empowerment. It's in connecting those people to the culture and to the brand of the organization that really become a key performance criteria for the workplace of today. So what are some of the key shifts? You talked a little bit about the generational shifts that we captured from outside North America. And I think that the thing that was interesting with that is typically these 3 major generations, the boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, which make up, quite frankly, the lion's share of the workforce today. In North America, these numbers have typically tracked about one-third, one-third, one-third. Once we started looking outside North America and to see the baby boomers number already dipping below 30%, was kind of a very, that was kind of a wake-up call. And we really feel that this is, that simply there's a harbinger of things to come to North America. There's a lot of speculation, why specifically in Europe has the baby boomer population that's fallen below one-third. It's speculation about a better safety net, that it's easier to retire and those types of things. But there's no real rhyme or fact behind it. All we know is the numbers are shifting and the generational shifts are occurring. Also, we understand that people, where they work, the work that they do really occurs in a variety of spaces. And these are the types of studies that have been done by numerous organizations. But when we did ours, we really understood the fact that the amount of time somebody spends in their primary workspace was going to be right around 50%. That number has always tracked between like 47 and 54%. But we asked the follow-up question, which was this: you're not at your desk, then where are you? So the findings came back and said, well, there's a good percentage of time spent in the building, like they're just in different sections of the building, in campus environments. And we looked at this not only from, if you will, the horizontal campus that would be more of an office part, but also a vertical campus, which would be an office tower, that they were on their campus. So as we started adding up some of these numbers, we started to realize that there's a good percentage of the time that people are spending in the office or an environment that is being supported by a corporate real estate exercise. So there's a funding element that goes into this. So we look at this as actually kind of debunking what we refer to as our fuzzy slipper syndrome, that not everybody's working at home in their fuzzy slippers, and a lot of people are still coming into the office for various types of engagement. It's not to mean that they're not working at home, because within their community may very well be either the third space, such as the cafe they may work from, or it could be their home, or they could be working outside their community where they're really geographically separated from the community of their primary business. And the size of the space that's being dedicated to these primary workspaces is shifting as well. Study that we looked at the space per person, the amount of square feet per person over the last 10 years. Obviously, from the direction of the arrow and the shrinking pie there, has gone down considerably. And we've actually seen this even go down, right around 100 square feet per person. So that's a significant drop from something just 10 years ago was pretty robust. And as much as we looked at the amount of square feet per person that's being deployed, we also looked at the notion of meeting rooms. And we tried to keep this relatively simple. Some people actually said, did you get the demarcation from like a pizza menu? We went extra small, small, large, and extra large meeting rooms. And we were really curious about the utilization rate across that spectrum. And as the graphics show, the highest utilization rate was in those extra small meeting rooms. Those 1 to 2 person rooms that really get better engagement and allow people to connect. And the most underused facility were those extra large meeting rooms. I think the one thing that's also telling, because we hear this a lot from organizations, is our people can't find any place to meet. The utilization number does not have to hit 100% for your people not to feel like they don't have a place to meet. So you typically just need to get around 74%. So I think if it starts tracking right around 74%, then your people are really feeling that they don't have a place to meet. And so the office is becoming a much more social space, and it's obviously becoming much more collaborative. People are feeling more comfortable in the workplace. They're having a higher degree of flexibility in the workplace. And it's supporting more of the well-being efforts that we look at. You see the workplace more as a hub in the business. You also see this expansion of flex work programs. We're in a world today where options really can't be taken away. Like if there's somebody who wants to work from home, if they want to work remotely, that's an option that cannot be taken away today. There's, of course, there was a case with Yahoo a few years ago where Melissa Mayer said she wanted her employees to come back to Yahoo. She wanted them to come back to the office. But that was really about seeing demonstratively the problems at Yahoo and repositioning that company on a different track. But quite frankly, the flex work programs, once again, especially abroad, are just expanding at a rapid pace. And as we also look at the workplace, some of the kind of subtle shifts is this notion of how do we create a more hospitable workplace? The whole notion of hospitality influence is coming into play. There's a lot of discussion about kind of fostering this kind of vibe that occurs in the Ace Hotel lobby or those types of things. But the notion of better food and better beverages come into play in this hospitality approach to planning for the workplace. So the planning itself is shifting. And we're seeing that shift somewhat being based on the nature of what people do. So that as we look at what people engage in, there's still an incredible importance on focus work. The individual with their head down, either crunching code or creating something on a 3D printer or doing something that is truly focused in nature. There's also the importance of teamwork, things that are very goal-oriented, that 4 to 8 person team. It's goal-oriented, it's group-based, and it's really focused on advancing the goal of the team. However, there's also, and it was reflected in the utilization of those small team rooms, this importance of sharing content between 1 to 2 to 3 people. That smaller group, that sharing of information where true knowledge exchange is occurring. That is a key component of work as well. And it's sort of like the glue that links all this together is that social work that occurs, that social component of work. The ability to feel comfortable in your setting, the ability to interact with your colleagues in the workplace, that social aspect is really taking on a higher precedent anymore. And so that has resulted in a variety of different types of. So as we look at this, there's no diminishing the importance of the primary space. What has evolved is this typology of different, what we refer to as activity spaces or group space. So there can be a refuge for personal reflection or just simply to be alone, or an enclave that is supporting 2 to 3 people just getting together. Of course, the team meeting space, still very important in team-based and group-based work. And the assembly space, where you're really trying to communicate large amounts of information or content with a wider audience. And then the community space itself, which simply really supports a lot of the unplanned interactions that occur during the day. So we have to take all these elements, the work modes, the variables that are impacting the building envelope, the notion of the generational distinction, and really start winding them into how do you really approach this from a planning standpoint, because it can become overwhelming, quite frankly. But as we look at it, we really, in one of our studies, got to this notion of how do you evolve the planning of your office. And we found that there was 4 distinct planning approaches with some attributes to all of them. And some of the attributes could kind of cross-pollinate, if you will. So as we look at it, one of the planning approaches, what we refer to as perimeter planning, which is this model of offices around the perimeter of the building and work setting, open work settings in the core. Still, many offices, many industries find this a very successful planning approach, and they're doing some innovation tied to it. But there's some attributes to it that perimeter office. There's typically some standards involved in the interior work setting, and the activity spaces are typically a little bit large and formal. The next step is really how do you go into this, what we refer to as core planning. And this typically occurs as people evolve from perimeter planning to the next stage, which is taking maybe some of the offices off the perimeter, moving them into the core, opening up the window line to more of an open plan. And there's more function that's considered, like how do we really create some work settings that are function-based versus anything else. The amenities, become pretty bumped up and become a little bit more available and accessible to the workforce. But it's still kind of driven by, the planning of the private offices and private offices model still being bundled around the core of the building. From an efficient standpoint, the primary workspace is really compacted. Now, this is really where the organization is driving efficiency from the real estate market. So smaller, fewer offices, very compact, universally sized primary workspace standards. There's typically a variety of activity spaces support. You're in a much smaller individual space, so you need other breakout areas to get to. And the amenities are really available for all. And then the one that we're seeing, some companies really experiment with is this notion of adaptive planning, where it's really about very few, if any, multifunctional offices. There are no true set standards. There's more like guidelines or different sets that people can engage in as they go through their workday. And the activity spaces are much more broad and more diverse. And the amenities are truly abundant. So there's a lot of different conveniences that are provided to the workforce in this model. And then the technology, really, this is where organizations have really adopted, if not a BYOD, a choose-your-own-device model that allows people to have the flexibility to work in a variety of spaces that are created through this planning approach. So this just helps us really kind of get a spectrum or a starting point for many companies. If they identify with one of these planning approaches, we can then help them define where they see themselves going next. And for some, it may be just adding in some attributes that's are represented in one of the other planning approaches into their existing planning approach. It may just be shifting the amenity side. It may be shifting some of the activity-based proportions. But it just gives us, from our vantage point, a nice starting point to engage with clients as we look at a variety of factors coming into play that are truly impacting the workplace today. Not only the demographic side, the technology side, the work process and change side, technology, as I mentioned, all are elements that come in to be considered as you start planning a workplace for your company today. So that kind of ends my portion of just the conversation to you. I understand we're going to be able to take some questions, and I think that's going to be coming through in on the chat session. So we look forward to some of the questions from all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy. So there are some questions coming in. I want to get to those. But just to let everybody know, please continue to submit your questions via the chat function. You can always use questions on social media using the hashtag. And I did put Tracy's email up here, so if you do have additional questions that we don't get to during the last few minutes here, feel free to shoot him an email. So, Tracy, my first question for you came in from Mary Kate. This was earlier when you were talking about Gen Y versus X versus baby boomers. She said, what is the range or what are the birth years for those generations for the purpose of your study? And she wanted you to clarify because she always thought that Y and X were the same.
Oh, good point. I've got to plead a little mea culpa here. I don't have that slide or that knowledge in front of me at the moment. I will send that out to the group, or the best way to get it out, okay? Because there's, obviously the baby boomers are the oldest generation, and the youngest generation currently in the workforce is Gen Y. And Gen X was that, quite frankly, it's a generation commonly associated with the .com era, is that smaller workforce that's kind of sandwiched in between. It's actually even sometimes referred to as the sandwich generation. The thing that really comes into play with those three major generations in the workplace today, boomers and the Gen Ys, really represent the largest numbers. And once again, this is just birth rates. So they're roughly each around 70 million strong. And the Gen Xers are significantly less. They're literally about 1/7 as much. So it's just a matter of, once again, birth rate. I will go to whatever the research study we captured that from and send out those age years. It does vary depending on who's doing the study. I know the U.S. Census has one way to look at it. Nielsen has another way to look at it. Some of it is shaped by social events that occur and not just true, like, a generation is X amount of years. So I will definitely get those out because we went through a lot of determination of what we were going to use for our markers for those three distinct generations. Sorry, I don't have it handy at the moment.
So the next question is from Mandy, and she said, what do you think the sharp rise in remote workers has, or what effect do you think the sharp rise in remote workers has on the overall workplace trend?
Oh, good question. I think one of the key things is put, some pressure on IT, to make accessibility really just that, that notion of ubiquitous technology. I think that's been a big component of remote working. I think also, and I think there's still some companies that grapple with this, the whole notion of how do you accommodate remote work. And I want to speak to that just for a moment because there's been different models deployed over the years, one of which, it just got a terrible name. It's referred to as hoteling. And you refer to something maybe like free address or this type of thing. And I think the thing that historically was done is that the space for the remote workers were isolated. We used to refer to them as, like hoteling Siberia. When the reality is the remote workers really needed to be part of the team. They needed to be ingrained or really designed into almost the highest density of the workplace. They needed to be, because they're visiting, they need to be visiting for the day or a few days or even longer, but they didn't need to be isolated. They needed to be brought in. So we really encourage companies, as they consider the setting for a remote worker, to really think about it in, quite frankly, more the higher density area of the office, so they can really participate and chime into the buzz of the workforce and aren't isolated from the workforce. They're actually there to work with.
Okay, great. So Mandy had a follow-up question. She said, how can physically co-located teams plan their physical workspace to best accommodate the remote and flex employees?
Yeah, I don't know if I touched on that when I answered the earlier question, but I think that planning. So once again, they're not isolated from these co-located teams. Quite frankly, if the remote workers or the flex workers, if there were two co-located teams, I'd almost put the flex worker models in between the two of them. I mean, they'd be the bridge that kind of bring them together. But I think not to isolate them becomes the key thing, making sure that they feel really comfortable with that. The one thing that becomes a little bit of an interesting dial for some companies is as you look at flex work and you look at remote work and you look at, and we've got a study that looks at this as well, you look at how do you plan for the space. Because typically, in a conventional office planning model, you plan one seat for every person. It's this 1-to-1 ratio. As you start getting into flex work and remote work, when you start doing that, you keep that 1-to-1 model, and you really start realizing you're wasting a lot of space because, these people, rarely do they all show up at the same time. If you do, you maybe have other type of activity spaces here that can accommodate the other, the overflow. So what you need to do is sometimes figure out what that may be. And it just gets really weird because we start talking to decimals of people. But for some companies, it's like 1.3 people per seat or 1.6. Some as high as 2.5. And sometimes in sales, it gets up into double digits of people, like 10 people per seat or something like that, because they're extremely remote and extremely flexible. So I find that comfortable ratio, and you can start experimenting with something like having 1.5. It's planning 1.5 people per seat. Then you're not getting a 1-to-1 ratio. You're getting enough seats for, if you will, the norm of activity for people coming and going. And if you do have that all hands on deck opportunity, that will be to spill into another type of larger community space.
Perfect. Thank you. So Gina has a question. She wanted to know what resources would you recommend to use for designing an office's primary space?
I really, first and foremost, kind of get a real clear understanding of what the people do. And this can be, it doesn't have to be the nitty-gritty, it doesn't have to be so granular. That's why we really like the work notes. As a matter of fact, for many times in the company, if we will ask them, can you distinguish, as you distinguish between focus, share, and teamwork, give us an understanding of what proportion that occurs in a day in the life or a week in the life of what you do. So if you understand in what proportion, if they're like 80%, I am heads down all the time. I don't do a lot of collaboration. The other thing is, are you factoring in wellness and well-being? Does higher adjustability come into play? So when people sitting all the time, or you don't want them standing all the time, you want that variety. Does that come in as you're designing the primary space to have higher adjustability baked into that? Or is there adjacent space that is at a different horizon that allows the person to go from a seated experience to a standing experience? So those are some of the questions that you start getting into. But there's a lot of information, a lot of research content out there. If you go to knoll.com, we have a research link. And what we've tried to do, we do the studies and we do the very in-depth white papers for those that are really passionate about the subject. But we also make some really lovely infographics that really take the key findings and put it in a context that you can read. It's very legible and can help maybe at least get you started down the road of designing workspace for your office workers.
Great. So I do want to hop back to the first question from Mary Kate. Tracy, it seems your colleague Veronica, who is attending today, she said, based on the reports that you guys have, for the clarification of the span of each of the generations, she said boomers are 1946 to 1965, Gen X is 1965 to 1978, Gen Y is 1979 to 97, and then Gen Z is 1998 and forward. So I just wanted to wanted to get that information out to you, Mary Kate. So we have a couple of questions left to get to here, Tracy. So my next one is from Sue, and this is an interesting one because I've seen this a couple of times in different organizations. She said, how do we get staff to buy in? As we transition to team rooms, we are seeing a morale issue with staff that are losing their personal offices.
Right. So I think if I'm reading this correctly or hearing this correctly, that it's almost a compound problem. It sounds like you have a population that's been moved out of private offices, and
correct.
So that's one aspect, and then the utilization of the team rooms almost becomes a corollary to that first thing. And we find that many times there's a reaction to the first thing, which is a movement out of a private office, and the team room and the morale issue really comes into play because of that. First and foremost is engage them early. We always like to say, change done to you is not that enticing. Change you participate in is truly exciting. So engage them in that process of what it can be. It sounds like this is a model that's already been deployed. So even if you were to look at small tweaks that could be done to the team rooms, engage them, engage some of the people that, I guess these team rooms were designed for. Say, how would they be better for you? Can we improve the technology? Or do you need more whiteboards? Do you need more privacy? Are the acoustics right for it? There's a lot of little things you can do to kind of tweak the model once you deploy it. The other thing is we always like to put it in the context of, if you're moving from a private office to an open plan, you may be giving up a private office, but you're really getting something else, and making sure that that something else is communicated to them. And whatever that may be, I don't know what the organization may have provided beyond that. Better amenities, more of these team rooms that you made reference to that they have access to. So there's a lot of different things that you want to make sure that they understand that the facility and real estate group is providing for them as they move from one planning model to the next. We always like to say that we don't like to think of the workplace today as simply the desk people go to. But we really like to say holistically, it's the whole facility. So if you have a community cafe that you have access to, if you have the team rooms that you make reference to, if you have some breakout space that you can go to, even if it's some things that are specific, training spaces that you can utilize, making sure that they really understand about the breadth of resources that are being provided for them. Because many times people are only focused on the fact that, their individual space went from this to that. And sometimes they have to be reminded there's a magnitude of other things that were provided to them as well.
Okay, my next question is from Joy. She wanted to know, with regards to a retail space where the business space is often in the back of the retail or the brick and mortar, how do you fit that into new planning as you've defined that? Or does it fit?
Yeah, that's always tough. I mean, having spent some time in retail back offices, it's kind of, I think you put it very well, is it's often in the back and it will often just fit in. I think some of the key elements is, once again, emphasizing what it is that actually goes on in that space. Sometimes it's considered as kind of an unfortunate necessity, but stressing really the work that goes on in that particular environment. We always like to keep it really focused on what people do. If you get into this discussion about what's provided or not provided, that becomes kind of sometimes a more difficult discussion. But if you really concentrate on, these are the activities I have to engage in. I always like this question. I mean, we do a lot of focus groups with a lot of larger groups and specific divisions within companies, and say, walk me through a day in your life. How do you start your day? Typically, when you come in, what do you do? What occurs next? Who do you engage with? Or you spend most of your time at your desk? Do you move and spend time with other people? Really understanding the kind of ebb and flow of the work that goes on really helps substantiate the importance of the place that work has to occur in.
Okay, great. So there's one more question I want to get to before we go. It's
Okay.
from Mary Kate again. She said, I see so much of productivity being associated with working relationships. She says, I personally dedicate time to building my trust in my organization and with my team. Can you speak to the fact if this is changing, or do you think this is changing? Is the workforce today still valuing trust? And if so, how do you build that in a virtual setting?
Really, really good. A couple things, because I think there's I may wander on this one a little bit because it's a really great question. There's a kind of a sense out there, and it may very well be true, that an implicit trust that was historically there between a company and an employee has been broken. Because we look at the nature of many companies today and many workforces today, we don't have the model of, we've been with the same company for 20 years, 30 years, get the gold watch, retire, everything's happy. So that kind of implied trust has been broken a little bit. So on the flip side, though, once again, going back to some of the key likes and key attractions to a workplace, it is about that community. It's about your coworkers. It's about building that team value. I think one of the things that happens, and this is in this kind of freedom of expression, people have that freedom to choose, that teams are built and there's camaraderie built. But if one of the, if you will, the key wheels of that team moves on to another place, that kind of dismantles that vibe, that energy a little bit. And in many instances, if that key wheel moves, certain elements of that team will move with it. So it's a tough thing. It's so funny. We would do a lot of work just from thinking about all those things from an urban landscape. And there's big cities and there's little neighborhoods, and quite frankly, many big cities are simply made up of a lot of small towns. And when we like to use that analogy to the workplace, how do you really foster a small town feeling if you're in a big enterprise, a big company? So that small town feeling comes around. Does your team have a kind of a space they can kind of call their own? Is it their own little hangout space that is for them? Is the environment, does it really help them foster that community feel amongst those smaller groups? And then could that in turn build some team loyalty? So I think those are just a few things from the loyalty standpoint. You touched on the notion of productivity, and I got to be honest, this is something from our standpoint we take a little bit of exception to, especially in today's world. As we look at a long view, as we've gone from industrial age to information age and this type of thing, while there are still many manufacturers out there, and the manufacturing line, process improvement and productivity is directly linked to, quite frankly, the number of widgets you make or the speed in which those widgets are made. How you really measure productivity in an information age, I think, becomes a little bit, it's a difficult measure. It's a tough one to get your hands around. Some of the better ones I've heard from companies is, after a change, after a workplace change, the question is posed such that do you personally feel more productive in this space than you were in the other space? Which I really feel is really a great way to pose the question. Because I think if we try to get too scientific with it and too metric-driven on productivity and the type of work a lot of companies do today, it becomes a little bit of a false measure. If you're asking someone, do you feel more productive in this space than the space you recently came from? Hopefully you'll get a really sincere response from them, and at least you'll get some sense. Are they feeling better about coming to work? Are they feeling better and contributing more? Are they feeling a bit more engaged in the workplace they have today than the workplace they had before? So.
Right. Great. Well, thank you so much for getting all those audience questions. And, of course, I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation today. As we wrap up here, I just want to remind everyone that we're going to be emailing you a link to today's recording, along with a link to download today's webinar presentation. Also, as you leave here, we'd love to get your feedback. So when you leave, you'll see a short survey pop up. If you could take a few moments of your time to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. And Tracy, thanks again for a wonderful presentation. And obviously, I want to thank both you and Noel for sharing your research with our audience. So with that, the webinar is ending, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Allie.